Hal Jordan might already be finished. Not dead, not defeated in a fight, but replaced quietly, while he is still standing right there in his own show. Every trailer for Lanterns has been dropping the same warning again and again, and almost nobody is talking about it out loud. Guy Gardner is already working a different team. Superman is already the biggest celebrity in the DCU, and Sinestro, locked away in a cell, might be the only person who actually knows what is coming for Hal Jordan. By the end of this video, you are going to look at every clip completely differently, because this is not just a story about John Stewart becoming a Green Lantern. This is the story of Hal Jordan being slowly written out of his own legacy, and the show is telling us this from the very first scene. Let's start with the biggest name that keeps popping up in these trailers without getting the attention he deserves: Guy Gardner. Most casual viewers only know Guy Gardner from the first Superman movie, where he shows up as this loud, arrogant, kind of obnoxious Green Lantern who is more interested in flexing his ego than actually being a hero. He is working for the Justice Gang, a team basically run and funded by Maxwell Lord, who is a tech billionaire in the DCU. That matters more than people realize, because it tells you something important about how this universe actually works. The Green Lantern Corps, the real one, run by the Guardians of Oa, does not pay its members a salary. There is no paycheck coming from space. Guy Gardner is the exception because Maxwell Lord is footing the bill for the Justice Gang, covering their gear, their branding, their whole operation, and paying them like employees. That is exactly why their suits look so corporate and bland, like something a marketing committee designed in a boardroom instead of something built for actual combat. It is supposed to look bad, because it is a privatized corporate version of being a hero. And Guy Gardner fits right into that world because he loves the attention, the fame, the whole celebrity treatment. Now here is where it connects to Lanterns. In the new trailer, we get a scene of Guy Gardner walking into a prison to talk to John Stewart. Not Hal Jordan, John Stewart. He looks annoyed, almost like he does not want to be doing this, and it looks like he is delivering some kind of warning about the Guardians sending an army after him. Think about that for a second. Why would Guy Gardner, a Green Lantern working essentially outside the main core at this point, be the one showing up to warn John Stewart specifically? Not Hal Jordan, John Stewart. That is not a small detail. That is the show quietly telling you who actually matters going forward. The theory that makes the most sense here is that Guy Gardner is not just delivering a warning. He might also be scouting John Stewart, feeling him out, maybe even recruiting him for something bigger down the road. Possibly connected to the events of the Man of Tomorrow movie, since we already know from James Gunn that John Stewart is going to be involved in that film too. So while Hal Jordan is off dealing with his own storyline, getting increasingly unstable, increasingly closer to some kind of villain arc, the DCU is already quietly building John Stewart up as the Green Lantern who matters for the future. Guy Gardner showing up here is basically a signal flare. It is the show telling longtime fans, watch this character, because he is the one being positioned for what comes next. While Hal Jordan gets pushed further and further to the side, whether he realizes it or not. Now, let's talk about why Superman matters to this whole theory, even though he is barely, if at all, physically present in the Lanterns trailers themselves. Superman's fame in the DCU is not just a side detail, it is actually the blueprint for understanding how celebrity and legacy work in this universe, and that directly explains what is happening to Hal Jordan. In the first Superman movie, even though Superman has only been active as a hero for about 3 years, he is already massively, overwhelmingly famous. Everybody in the DCU knows who he is. He has become this larger-than-life figure almost instantly, and a big part of that is because of how the media, the government, and public perception all move at lightning speed once someone becomes a superhero in that world. Guy Gardner and the Justice Gang lean into that same phenomenon. They have Maxwell Lord doing PR work for them, spinning their image, managing how the public sees them. Because in the DCU, being a hero is not just about saving people, it is about how you are perceived. Now apply that same logic to Hal Jordan. In the Lanterns timeline, these flashback scenes are happening around 10 years before the events of Man of Tomorrow, which James Gunn has said takes place around 2027. That means the interrogation scenes, the small Midwestern town scenes, all of that is happening around 2017. And by that point in the show, Hal Jordan is already a celebrity. Not a small deal, a legitimate, recognized public figure. We literally see flashbacks of a young John Stewart watching Hal Jordan on television, giving interviews about being part of the Green Lantern Corps, talking about his past as a test pilot, being treated like a hero on the news. Even in a tiny town that nobody pays attention to, people still recognize him instantly when he rolls into town. That is why Sheriff Carey gets so irritated with him early on. She basically tells him, "I get it. You are famous, everybody loves you, but this is my murder case. Stop getting in my way." So think about what this means. Hal Jordan built his entire identity around being this celebrity hero, the face of the Green Lantern Corps on Earth, just like Superman became the face of hope in his own movie. But fame like that does not last forever. Especially not in a universe where James Gunn is clearly setting up Jon Stewart to be the main Green Lantern for his new incoming Justice League. If Superman's meteoric fame shows us how fast someone can rise to legendary status in the DCU, then Hal Jordan's story might be showing us the flip side of that same coin. How fast someone can also be quietly phased out once a new face is ready to take their place. Every time the show reminds us how famous and beloved Hal Jordan is right now, it almost feels like it is setting up a bigger fall later. Because right now, all of that fame is resting entirely on his shoulders. And the show keeps hinting that those shoulders will not be carrying that weight for much longer. Now here is where things get genuinely unsettling, and it all centers around Sinestro. In the trailer, we get several scenes of Hal Jordan visiting Sinestro in prison. For people who are not deep into Green Lantern lore, Sinestro used to be one of the most respected members of the entire Green Lantern Corps, before he attempted to take over and rule with an iron fist, essentially rebelling against everything the Corps stood for. Hal Jordan was the one who stopped him, the one who helped lock him away. That already tells you these two have serious history, but what makes it disturbing is what is happening now. According to recent reveals about the series, the Guardians of Oa are deeply worried about Hal Jordan. Not because of anything he has done publicly, but because of something much quieter and more dangerous. The fact that he keeps returning to Sinestro's prison cell again and again to talk to him, to get advice from him. Think about that for a moment. The person the Guardians trust the least, the one who tried to destroy the entire Corps from within, is the person Hal Jordan keeps going back to for guidance. That alone is enough to make the Guardians nervous, but combined with everything else happening around Hal Jordan in this series, it starts to look like the early stages of a much darker transformation. This is exactly why so many longtime Green Lantern fans immediately started asking if the show is quietly setting up a version of the Parallax storyline, a classic and incredibly important arc in Green Lantern comics, where Hal Jordan eventually turns into a villain under completely different circumstances than what we are seeing here. But the emotional core is similar: fear, isolation, and pressure slowly corrupting someone who used to be one of the most trusted heroes in the universe. And there is visual evidence supporting this theory too. In several present-day scenes throughout the trailer, Hal Jordan's Green Lantern suit does not look like the bright, vibrant green we are used to seeing. It looks faded, almost worn out, with a strange yellowish tint creeping into it. Even the ring itself gives off subtle golden undertones in certain shots. In Green Lantern lore, yellow is deeply connected to fear, and fear is the exact opposite of what a Green Lantern ring is supposed to represent, since the entire requirement to become a Green Lantern is having no fear at all. So if Hal Jordan's suit and ring are visually shifting toward yellow, that is not just a stylistic choice, that is the show planting a symbol right in front of us. A warning sign that something inside Hal Jordan is beginning to crack. Combine that with his secret visits to Sinestro, the Guardians openly discussing their fears about him behind his back, and the fact that James Gunn has confirmed Jon Stewart will be the primary Green Lantern for his new version of the Justice League, and a very uncomfortable picture starts to form. Hal Jordan is not just training his replacement because the Corps decided it was time for a changeover. He might be training his replacement because deep down, something is already going wrong with him, and everyone around him is starting to notice it before he does. This is where the replacement theory really comes together. And it hits differently once you put every piece side by side. Hal Jordan is not simply mentoring Jon Stewart the way an older, more experienced hero passes down knowledge to a rookie out of generosity. If you actually pay attention to specific lines in the trailer, Hal Jordan has openly talked to Sinestro about feeling like he is being pushed out, saying something along the lines of, "The Lantern Corps wants to get rid of me. They want to replace me with this young guy." That is not the mindset of someone comfortable handing off responsibility. That is the mindset of someone who feels threatened, someone who feels like his entire identity, the thing he built his whole life and fame around, is quietly being taken away from him while he is forced to smile and train the person taking his place. And structurally, the show is built in a way that reinforces this. There are two separate timelines running throughout Lanterns. One set in the past, showing Hal Jordan training a young Jon Stewart, and one set roughly 10 years later, right before the events of Man of Tomorrow, where Jon Stewart is already established enough to be involved in that movie. If you think about how the show treats Green Lantern rings, it treats it like there can only be one active ring bearer representing Earth at a time, even though, in the comics, Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart have both held their own separate rings simultaneously, without one replacing the other. But this adaptation seems to be deliberately simplifying that, treating it as a direct passing of the torch, which raises a genuinely dark question: what actually happens to Hal Jordan by the end of the series, to explain why Jon Stewart ends up being the one carrying the ring going forward? There was already an early fan theory floating around that this being an HBO series might lead the show to do something similar to what Game of Thrones did with major characters, essentially removing Hal Jordan permanently by the end of the season to cleanly explain Jon Stewart stepping fully into that role for the future of the DCU, whether that means death, disappearance, being consumed by fear and turning into something like Parallax, or simply stepping away from the core entirely after some kind of breaking point. The show keeps building towards some major turning point for Hal Jordan specifically. And this lines up perfectly with everything we already know about where James Gunn is taking the DCU. He has been extremely clear that Jon Stewart is being positioned as his main Green Lantern for the new Justice League he is building. That is not a small comment. That is basically confirmation of the direction this franchise is heading in. And Lanterns exists specifically to build up Jon Stewart's origin so that by the time Man of Tomorrow and future Justice League projects arrive, audiences already understand who he is, what he has been through, and why he deserves to be trusted with that ring. Hal Jordan, meanwhile, gets to be the celebrated celebrity war hero whose story quietly winds down right as someone else's story is just getting started. So when you put Gardner, Superman's meteoric fame, and Sinestro's dangerous influence all together, a much bigger picture starts to form, and it is honestly one of the more emotionally interesting directions this franchise could go in. This is not just a straightforward superhero training story. It is a story about legacy, about what happens when the person who used to be the biggest hero in the room slowly realizes the world is moving on without him, whether he is ready for that or not. Gardner represents the corporate, celebrity-driven side of heroism that Hal Jordan himself has been living inside for years. Superman represents just how fast and how massive that kind of fame can become, and how quickly the public can shift their attention toward whoever becomes